Today we're not loading up Football Manager. I am looking through all of the Premier League sides, taking away. I'm only actually doing 17 of them because I'm not including Leicester, Ipswich, or whichever side go up this Sunday in the playoff final. And I'm not including any of the 3 relegated teams, Luton, Burnley, and Sheffield. I'm just taking in the 17 teams that were in the Premier League last season and are still going into it in the next season. And I'm going to go through each Premier League side and say which player I think they should sign this summer in the upcoming transfer window. I've looked through each squad, I've tried to find the weaknesses in each side and see where they could strengthen this summer, and I've tried to find a realistic target that's not going to cost ridiculous amounts of money. I've not said, the likes of Kylian Mbappe or Victor Osimhen, the ones that cost 100 million plus. I've just picked the ones that I think are realistic within the budget that they might have and who I think could strengthen their side the most and have a good impact on the squad going into the upcoming season. So let's get started. Starting then with Arsenal, and I think the main thing that everybody knows Arsenal needs is a goal scoring forward. Gabriel Jesus just isn't that ruthless goal scorer that they need that can make a difference in matches. He's also unreliable a little bit with his injuries. I don't think he's spent 2 seasons now at Arsenal and he hasn't completed a full season. He's picked up a few knocks, a few injuries here and there. And I think that the man that they should be looking for is Ollie Watkins from Aston Villa. Now, he's just had a phenomenal season for Aston Villa, getting them into the top 4. And it's going to be really tough to take him away from Aston Villa now that they've got Champions League football, because they're not going to be obliged to sell Ollie Watkins. But, however, Aston Villa are potentially going to have to sell some players to keep in line and potentially reinvest the money into the squad, because they have been warned that they are getting a bit close with the FFP regulations. So after 19 goals and 13 assists this Premier League season, he finished with the most assists out of any player in the Premier League. 19 goals was enough to secure him, I think it was 4th place in the Golden Boot race. It was his best ever career season. He's entering his prime years. He's coming up to that 26, 27, 28 years of age, which is the perfect age for a striker, and I think he could potentially be the difference, given the players that he will have around him. It's a bit different going from John McGinn and Leon Bailey to Martin Odegaard, Gabriel Martinelli, Bukayo Saka. He could hit a 20-goal season at Arsenal. I think he may thrive in an Arsenal team, because Arsenal strikers do like to, move around, get around the pitch, roam a little bit. You've seen Trossard when he's played up there as well. He's often over to the left, over to the right. And Watkins for Villa does like to be able to be where he wants to be and not just be sat in front of the goal like some strikers do in other teams in the league. So I think he would be given that free roam sort of role in Arsenal's team. So Ollie Watkins is a good fit, I think, for Arsenal to sign this summer. I think he'd probably cost around 60-70 million. I can't see Villa trying to hold out any more than that. It's a bit different to the Jack Grealish signing. Jack Grealish was by far their best player, and it's a bit different now. They've got other key players, and I think Villa would take 60-70 million because they could probably reinvest that money into getting another striker, or they could tempt John Duran to stay and potentially be the next starter, because obviously there's rumours that he wants to leave because he wants to be, the star number 9 at a club, and potentially they could get him to stay with the departure of Ollie Watkins and reinvest that money getting ready to build themselves a Champions League level squad. So for Arsenal, I think Ollie Watkins is a good pick for them. Moving on now to the team that I just said should be selling a player. Aston Villa are next up, and I think where the weakness is in their side at the minute is the wide areas of the defence. I don't think Luca Digne is anymore the player that he was certainly a few years ago at the likes of Everton, when he was one of the best fullbacks in the league. I don't think Moreno is all there for this level, and I definitely don't think he's a Champions League level fullback. And Matty Cash just seems like he's getting more out of his depth as the years go on and as the team improves. So fullback's definitely a weakness, and I have identified, I think they're already rumoured with him, I'm not sure about this, but Thiago Santos from Lille, the Portuguese fullback, he's just had a really good season with Lille. He's quite young as well, young up-and-coming fullback, and I think they could probably pick him up for a decent amount of money. He played every minute against Aston Villa in the Europa Conference League quarterfinals this year, where Villa won on penalties. So he's already had that stage to sort of impress the Villa scouts. He's played against them. He played every minute going into extra time as well. And he's had a really good season. He got named in the League One team of the season as well. I think he's a decent fullback and he's good enough to potentially grow with the squad. And if they want to keep improving the squad, then he's a good fullback to get, and he's one for the future as well. So he's not going to be one where it's just a temporary solution. He's going to come in, he's going to grow with the squad, because Villa, at the end of the day, is probably a long-term project. They probably have higher aspirations. I know they've just got Champions League, and it feels like they're at the highest they can be, but realistically, some of the players in their squad are young enough that they can just keep growing and keep pushing on. And if Villa want to be at that level, they need to sign these young players that have a high ceiling and get them to that place. Moving on then to Bournemouth. Bournemouth had quite a high spending summer last season, and the player that I've identified for Bournemouth is dependent on who goes up on Sunday between Leeds and Southampton in the playoff final. Should it be Southampton that come up to the Premier League, I think Jorginho Rutter, their sort of second striker for Leeds, should be a man that Bournemouth are looking at. Potentially, we could see the departure of Dominic Solanke this summer, and if Bournemouth aren't able to keep hold of him, I think they need to look for a potential striker option. But if they manage to keep hold of Solanke and are looking for someone to maybe play either alongside him or just behind him, Jorginho Rutter's just had a great season in the Championship. He's only 21 years of age, so he's really young, and he's got a really good potential of a career. He hit 17 assists this season in Championship, also scoring 6 goals, playing for Leeds. Now, that's a really good season for a Championship. 17 assists in a league campaign is really good, especially for a young lad as well. And I think Bournemouth could do with someone like that to create goals and also potentially be the long-term successor of Dom Solanke if he is to leave, whether it's this season or next season, because there is a lot of clubs looking for strikers right now, and Solanke has just had his best career season, so I could see Bournemouth potentially trying to cash in on Solanke and get a replacement in, and maybe Jorginho Rutter is perhaps that one. He's a young lad, and he could really change this team. Moving on to a club then across the seaside, we have Brighton, and Brighton are in a bit of a weird situation because the shock announcement of Roberto De Zerbi not continuing at the club. He's left the club, and they are looking for a new manager. So it was a bit tough to try and find a player that would suit Brighton at this current moment in time, because I'm not sure who they're going to bring in as a manager to potentially play. So I think they didn't really replace Moises Caicedo when they sold him to Chelsea. And I think Baleba, the kid as well, that could come through and potentially fill that role. But if they want potentially a more short-term resolution to get them through this transition between De Zerbi and whoever the manager is going to come in and completely change the style of play, I think Jefferson Lerma is a good DM. Obviously, he would be coming from rivals Palace. Palace only picked him up on a free last season. But I think Palace, with the shortened midfield that they play now with Wharton and Decore, I don't know if Lerma is going to play much, because Lerma was playing in centre-back a few times just to get minutes, because they didn't really have the centre-backs that they would have wanted to play the new back five under Glasner. But I could see Lerma potentially wanting more of a starting role in the side, and I don't know if he's going to get that in this Palace team. And I think Brighton, who are potentially looking for a defensive midfielder, could do with the likes of Jefferson Lerma, strengthening, because he is a really good defensive midfielder. I do quite like Jefferson Lerma and what he can bring to a team. He's an experienced head, he's not too old either, and I think Brighton would be a good fit for him. Moving on to Brentford then, and I think that potentially Ivan Toney is more or less sure to leave, and I actually think that they might be okay without him. And Buemo looks pretty good to be a replacement, and Johan Visser as well also looks quite good, and I think Brentford are quite, comfortable with having that sort of wide player that can play up front. So I think they should go for a third one, and I think Adam Armstrong, if Southampton aren't to go up from the Premier League, would be an excellent addition for Brentford, because 21 goals and 13 assists in the Championship this season. Phenomenal numbers from Adam Armstrong. He's not physically, as dominant as the likes of Ivan Toney and Mbeumo. Obviously, he's a lot shorter, but he's a lot faster as well. So potentially be a wide player for Mbeumo to maybe play up front. But he's 27 as well. He's not old. He's entering his prime. And I think Brentford would be a good club for him if he doesn't go up with Southampton, because I don't think Adam Armstrong is going to be happy playing another season in the Championship. He's proved twice now he's far too good to play in this league. He needs that chance to play in the Premier League. And I think if Ivan Toney is to leave, which it definitely looks likely, I think Adam Armstrong should join Brentford. Crystal Palace, obviously under Oliver Glasner, looked like one of the best teams in the league towards the end of the season. They looked phenomenal. Mateta firing goals. Elise and Eze just look absolutely phenomenal to watch. And the main thing with this season is going to be them trying to keep hold of their key players like Elise and Eze. Those two have to stay for Palace to progress on. You know, they just finished, they got their highest ever Premier League finish, finishing 10th. And I think they probably need another centre-back or potentially a wide centre-back in this back five that Glasner wants to play. So, he hasn't really played that role much, but I think he'd actually be good suited for it. Aaron Wan-Bissaka from Man United. Obviously, he went from Palace for a big fee. I don't think Palace would need to spend anywhere near what they sold him for. I think Palace could probably get Wan-Bissaka for a cheaper price, and I think United are probably going to try and off-sale a fair few players this summer to try and completely change the squad because they're a mess at the minute. And I think on the right side of a back three, Aaron Wan-Bissaka could play a role. He's tall enough to play as a centre-back. He's defensively minded enough to play as a centre-back. Obviously, when he plays full-back for United, he's really good defensively, but he cannot go forward. And I think across a back three, as on the right side of a back three, Aaron Wan-Bissaka could play a decent role for a club there, especially for the likes of Crystal Palace as well, where he came through and broke through. So, Aaron Wan-Bissaka is my pick for Crystal Palace, and I think he'd be a good addition in that back five in a Glasner. Moving on to a team then that just throw money around for the sake of it, Chelsea. How do you pick a player for Chelsea who have just signed so many players? But I think I've identified an area at centre-back. They do have a lot of centre-backs, but I don't see any of them as like that centre-back, like that it factor. Maybe Colwill, but they like to play him out on the left a few times. But they've just lost Thiago Silva. He's gone to Brazil to play, to kind of end his career. And I do think there's a Portuguese centre-back at Benfica called Antonio Silva. So one Silva leaves and another joins. A young centre-half, really promising, one of the top prospects at centre-back in the world. And I think Antonio Silva, Chelsea have a really, really young squad, one of the youngest squads on average age in the league, and I think Antonio Silva could grow with the rest of that squad. And yeah, they bought in Enzo from Benfica, and Enzo's been pretty good. So perhaps they've got a decent route there with Antonio Silva. I think he'd strengthen up the team pretty well. Obviously, it might take a bit, to get used to the Premier League football, but he already looks like a really good centre-half, and I think he could just be even better in a Chelsea team. But at the minute, Chelsea, again, another shock managerial departure with Maurizio Pochettino announcing that he was leaving the club. So we don't know who's going to take over Chelsea yet, but I think Antonio Silva, if they pick him up, would be a good addition to any manager. So yeah, he's definitely one that I think Chelsea should go for. Moving on then to a team that I don't know if they can actually spend much money with the points deductions and FFP stuff that they've been under this season. Just a quick pause while I'm editing this video to say that I did not know that the player that I'm about to speak about has actually already moved clubs this summer, because they did go out on loan, and that loan had a optional buy fee that the club who did get him in on loan have activated. So it's probably best to ignore everything that you're about to hear about Everton right now. Everton. Now, Everton's a tough one because they're a bit inconsistent. Sometimes they'll look really good and sometimes they'll look terrible. Like, they started the season really well, and then sort of the mid to the back end of the season, they hadn't won in a long time, really. But then they sort of had a decent last few games as well. But I think definitely Everton need a goal scorer. There's a lot of teams that need a goal scorer. Everton have Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who on his day is a really good striker, but that day never comes when he spends, 4/5 of a season on the injury table. The guy is never fit, and Beto looks awful. I'm sorry, but he is not a number 9 that can take you to potentially get back up to mid-table and push for European places. I don't know if that's Everton's aspirations right now. They're just hoping that they can stay in the Premier League. But a man that's just been out on loan to Nottingham Forest, I think Chris Wood could play a part in an Everton team. They still have Sean Dyche at manager, and Sean Dyche has managed Chris Wood before at Burnley. And I think Chris Wood still has a part to play in a team. He's not going to play at Newcastle. Newcastle will probably look to get rid of him. And if Forest don't go in for him, I think Everton should. Everton should just get someone in who's good enough to just score goals if given the opportunity, and that's who they need, because Beto is not good enough. And I think Chris Wood, he showed this season with Forest that he's still good enough to play in the Premier League and still good enough to score goals when he needs to and when he's there. So Everton signing Chris Wood, they probably pay less than £10 million for him. He's a good cheap striker to score goals, and I think that's definitely a short-term resolution for their goal-scoring problems. Moving on then to the London club Fulham, and I think Fulham, their issues are definitely out wide. Willian is just getting older and older as the days go by, and the likes of Harry Wilson, I don't know if they're that level. So I have identified Willie Gnonto from Leeds. He doesn't really... I know he likes to play up front, and he could potentially play up front for Fulham. Fulham don't exactly have like a proper clinical goal-scoring number 9. But Gnonto is more than good enough to play out wide, and he's a young player as well. We know how talented he is just from watching him in that season that Leeds were still in the Premier League. He was just one of the best players for Leeds, and he's continued into the Championship as well. He's phenomenal. He's a really good player for his age, and I think it'd be good for Fulham. He'd be one of the better players at Fulham, and I think if Fulham can get him from Leeds, if Leeds don't go up, it's a really good signing for them. Moving on to Liverpool then, who was sort of in the midst of a transitional period because their squad's getting older, the likes of Salah, Van Dijk, all aging, while Jurgen Klopp has just left the club and Arne Slot looks like he's going to be the man to come in. And the thing with Liverpool is it's their squad depth that's actually the problem. I don't think they've got enough key squad depth. It's not strong enough to sort of, if they get injuries, they're not really competing. We saw, especially towards the back end of the season, where they were in the title race and then injuries sort of caught up with them. And when players weren't performing, they couldn't really afford to drop them because they just didn't have the replacements. So, I think I looked at Feyenoord's squad because Arne Slot has managed there before, and a key player that I saw was Santiago Jimenez. He's been linked with a few Premier League clubs, mainly Tottenham. He scored 23 goals in 30 games in the Eredivisie for Feyenoord this season, which is really good return numbers for a striker. And I think, do they need a striker? Probably. Darwin Núñez just broke Liverpool's record. He's now missed, he's missed the most big chances ever in a Liverpool SWAT side. So I don't think they should be looking for a main number 9. I think if they want to go forward with Darwin Núñez, they spent big on him. But Santiago Jimenez probably wouldn't cost an absolute shed load, and he's good enough to be sort of a second string striker for a big team, and he's good enough to just challenge Núñez for a spot. Because if Núñez isn't performing right now, they have no one to drop him for. Whereas if they have Jimenez as sort of the second option, if Núñez doesn't perform, he knows he's going to be out the team and Jimenez is going to be in the team. So I think Santiago Jimenez is a good enough striker to play for Liverpool, and I think he's definitely good enough to at least be a rotational option and competition for Darwin Núñez. Moving on then to the best team in the league, Manchester City. How do you strengthen this team even further? Unfortunately, I think they should be signing Michael Olise. They didn't really replace Riyad Mahrez when he left last summer. They didn't really bring in a right-sided winger. They've obviously used Jeremy Doku on the left side a lot this season. They've used Alvarez on the right. They've used Foden a few times on the right, but he's sort of fluid between the right and the centre. But I think Michael Olise would be brilliant in this Manchester City team. He's just so good on the ball, and this City team, you need to be good on the ball. And Michael Olise is just one of the best players to watch on the ball right now in the Premier League. He's so good on the ball. He's so confident. He picks out a pass really well. He runs with the ball really well, and he's got an eye for goal as well. And I think if he joined City, his career would go to a next level. It's just the injury record that is a bit worrying, because he has picked up a fair few injuries over the last few seasons. But if he stays fit, he's an absolute brilliant addition to this Manchester City team. And I think, he does have that 60 million release clause this summer that Manchester City definitely wouldn't have a problem paying. So Michael Olise is my signing for Manchester City. Moving on then to the other side of Manchester, we have a team that probably could do with another player in every single position. But I think the main problem is their midfield. Although they definitely need another centre-back as well. But the midfield is definitely the biggest problem. They've got Mainu, who they've had to bring through, and he's looked good at times this season. Bruno, obviously, is a mainstay in this United team, but they need that third option because, Amrabat definitely wasn't it this season. Casemiro looks like he's got half a leg left, and they need a defensive-minded midfielder. So I've gone with a man that probably should have been leaving last season. I've gone with João Palhinha from Fulham. I think he's an aggressive defensive midfielder. He's got legs, unlike Casemiro, and I think he's good enough to play for a team especially, a team like United. He's got a strong head, he's good in a tackle, he reads the game well, and I think he's a good addition to a United side who are trying to build on, and he's definitely a good addition to play alongside Mainu if you're trying to play, because Mainu is not the man to play as a defensive midfielder on his own. I think United definitely need a defensive-minded midfielder. You definitely don't want to be playing Mainu, Mount and Fernandes because that team would fall apart. So, João Paulinho I think is a man that could strengthen this midfield especially, and João Paulinho is the man I think they should go for. Speaking of Man United, over in Newcastle, I think they should go for Amad Diallo. So, Diallo has looked phenomenal when he's actually played for United this season. He scored that, really important goal against Liverpool in the FA Cup. He started to actually play towards the end of the season, but for some reason Eric Ten Hag just doesn't like him. He had a really, really good season in the Championship for Sunderland, which may piss off a lot of Sunderland fans if he ends up going to Newcastle. But Newcastle's main key weakness is at their right side of the attack. And Almiron, as much as he had a good season last season, and he was alright at the start of this season, he's not good enough to play for Newcastle anymore. He's probably good enough to, be the backup option and add squad depth. But Amad Diallo, I think, needs to leave Man United for the own good of his career, because he is a promising player, but he's just not going to make it at United because for some reason United don't want to play him. Obviously, they've got Anthony, they've got Garnacho that are playing in his position right now. So I think he just needs to leave and be the starting winger at club. And I think Newcastle is a good club for Amad Diallo. He'd link up well with the likes of Isak. He'd link up well with the likes of Bruno Guimaraes. I think Amad Diallo is a good signing for Newcastle, and I think that's the direction that they should be looking. Moving on to Nottingham Forest then, and I think the centre-backs are a bit weak in their side. So I think that they should go for one of the players that have just gone down with Burnley in Jordan Bayer. German young centre-back would be good, I think, for Nottingham Forest. It might take a little bit to convince Burnley to let him go, because obviously he is still young and there is no rush to move him on. But Burnley could be losing Vincent Kompany, so they might not have the same pull to keep Jordan Bayer around, and I think he might be a good signing for Nottingham Forest, potentially strengthen the centre-back department in their squad. 3 sides left then, and we've next got Tottenham. Now, Tottenham are an interesting side. This season, they looked really, really good, and they've looked really, really bad, and it's just that's Tottenham. Sometimes they can look like one of the better teams in the league, and sometimes they can look like one of the worst. But injuries really killed them off this season. They need squad depth, and what also killed them off is not having a proper number 9. Heung-min Son obviously plays excellently through the middle, but everyone knows he's better on the left. So, who can link the play between Heung-min Son and Kulusevski? Because I think Tottenham would be better off with a striker that's not just a 9 to tap goals in, but will also come back and allow Son and Kulusevski to also attack as sort of the inside forwards. So, a player that I've identified is Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney, obviously, the controversy of his betting actions, and he didn't really have a good, season when he came back in January. He didn't really pick many goals up, but I just don't think his heart is in Brentford anymore. I think he wants that move, and I think Tottenham's a good fit for him. I think he's definitely going to start for Tottenham. He's going to be one of the Tottenham's key players, and I think he's a good enough striker. On the ball as well, he holds up play really well, and he would allow Son to do what he wants to do. He can just, if they just give the ball to Toney, Toney holds up play, and Son can just pick the ball back up off him and start running. And Toney's a good, many people don't think it, but Ivan Toney works hard in a team as well. His work rate's very, he works hard, he's always running, so. And I think that's what they need in this Tottenham team, because they are very high intensity, and it did kill them off towards the end of the season. But Ivan Toney is who I think Tottenham should sign this summer. Moving on then to West Ham, and they've got, Lopetegui's coming in. They're finally moving on from David Moyes, and West Ham for about 4 years now have needed a striker. Michail Antonio, I'm very shocked he's managed to last this long as West Ham's main number 9. They bought in Sebastian Haller, it didn't work out. They bought in Gianluca Scamacca, it didn't work out. But I looked at Lopetegui's record. He's managed Real Madrid. They're not signing anyone from Real Madrid. He managed Wolves. I don't see anyone in that Wolves team that could potentially strengthen West Ham. But the main one is Sevilla. And I think El Nasiri is a good striker for West Ham. He scored 15 goals this season in La Liga. He's a young lad as well. He's 26, I think. He's entering the prime years, and I think he's a good striker for West Ham to potentially pick up as well. You'd have to just convince him to join West Ham when they aren't in any European football this season for the first time in a few seasons. But I think El Nassiri, if they can pick him up, I don't think it costs too much. Maybe 30 million could potentially tempt Sevilla to let him go. And he's worked under Lopetegui before, and I think, it's a good addition. They need a striker, and I think El Nassiri is a good enough goal-scoring striker to potentially help this West Ham team to get back into the Conference League or the Europa League, which is where they want to be at the end of the day. And finally, the final team in this is Wolves. Now, Wolves don't really have many poor areas. They're quite well balanced of a squad. Obviously, striker's a little bit of an issue, but Hwang Hee-chan has played well there this season, got 13 goals, I think, in all comps. Mateus Cunha can play up front as well. They've got Sasha Kalajdzic, who, as far as he has no knees, he's still a striker. But obviously they like the back five, and I don't think they've got enough good centre-backs at the minute to play it. So, to strengthen that up, as much as it really, really pains me to say, but on a free, Cedric Kipre from West Brom would be potentially a good signing for Wolves. And I don't want it to happen because I'm a West Brom fan, and, to see one of our most important players go to Wolves for £0 would be an absolute pain in the arse. But Cedric Kipre, he's just had a really good season for us at West Brom. He's shown that he's good enough to potentially play in the Premier League now. And I think Wolves, I don't know what their financial status is saying. Obviously, they haven't been able to spend for the last few years. But I think if they're looking for someone that they don't have to pay a penny for, Cedric Kipre is a good enough centre-back to potentially even start. But if he's not good enough to start for them, then I'm sure he'd be fine to just sit and be cover in a Premier League side. And I really don't want it to happen, but I think it does suit Wolves, and I think Cedric Kipre would have a decent part to play in this Wolves team. But that is it for this video. If you've got any suggestions on who you think different Premier League clubs should be signing this summer, then make sure to let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I've said before, I am mainly a Football Manager content creator, but I am obliged to do these types of videos just to spice things up, to make things a little bit different. Make sure to like the video, and obviously leave in the comments what you want to see in the future. And until next time, take care and goodbye.